I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd lose everything in a divorce. But there I was, standing outside what used to be our home, a $4 million mansion in the hills, watching movers carry out the last of my belongings in 3 sad boxes. 3 boxes. That's what 12 years of marriage amounted to. My name is Jennifer, and 6 months ago, I had it all. Or at least I thought I did. A successful husband, Marcus, who ran a tech startup. A beautiful home with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A walk-in closet bigger than most people's bedrooms. Country club memberships, charity galas, vacation homes. The whole picture-perfect life. But perfect pictures can hide the ugliest truths. It started falling apart when I found the texts. Not just one affair. 3. 3 different women over the course of our marriage. When I confronted Marcus, he didn't even try to deny it. He just looked at me with those cold eyes and said the words that still echo in my head. Marcus said, "You were always too focused on playing housewife." I needed someone who could match my ambition. I remember standing in our kitchen, the Italian marble cold under my bare feet, feeling like the floor was opening up beneath me. I'd given up my career as a marketing director to support his dreams. I'd hosted countless dinner parties for his investors. I'd smiled through every corporate event, every business trip, every late night at the office that I now realized wasn't spent working at all. The divorce was brutal. Marcus had the better lawyers. More importantly, he had his father, Richard, a retired judge with connections that ran deep through the county's legal system. I should have seen it coming, but I was naive. I thought the truth would matter. I thought 12 years of dedication would count for something. My lawyer, Patricia, tried to warn me. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. Patricia said, "Jennifer, they're going to fight dirty. Richard knows every judge in this district. We need to be strategic." But I was too hurt, too angry to be strategic. I wanted justice. I wanted Marcus to admit what he'd done. I wanted him to face consequences. Instead, I got destroyed. The court proceedings were a nightmare. Marcus's lawyers painted me as a gold digger who'd married for money. They brought up every shopping trip, every spa day, every lunch with friends as evidence of my excessive spending. They conveniently ignored that Marcus had encouraged all of it, that he'd wanted a wife who looked the part of a successful CEO's partner. Richard sat in the courtroom every single day, his presence a silent threat. He'd nod at the judge, share quiet words with Marcus's legal team during breaks, smile that politician's smile that never reached his eyes. The final judgment came down like a guillotine. Marcus got the mansion. He got the vacation property in Aspen. He got the investment portfolio. I got a tiny settlement, barely enough to cover first and last month's rent on a modest apartment, and my car. That was it. My best friend, Rachel, helped me move into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I'd never even driven through before. It was a far cry from the hills. The walls were thin. I could hear my neighbors arguing at 2 in the morning. The kitchen was so small I could barely turn around in it. Rachel tried to stay positive. She was always like that, finding silver linings in storm clouds. Rachel said, "Look, it's a fresh start. You can rebuild. You're only 37. You've got your whole life ahead of you." But lying in bed that first night, listening to sirens wail in the distance, I didn't feel like I had anything ahead of me. I felt hollowed out, used up, discarded. The weeks that followed were dark. I'd wake up and forget where I was, reaching for the luxury of high thread count sheets, only to find scratchy bargain betting. I'd go to make coffee and remember I didn't have my espresso machine anymore. Every small reminder of what I'd lost felt like a fresh cut. I tried to find work, but 12 years out of the marketing game meant my skills were outdated. Social media had exploded. Digital marketing was a whole new world. The interviews were humiliating. One hiring manager, a kid who looked barely 25, actually laughed when he saw my resume. He said, "So you've been out of work for over a decade? What have you been doing? Just shopping?" I left that interview and sat in my car in the parking lot and cried until I couldn't breathe. This was my life now. Being mocked by children. Being dismissed. Being nothing. Rachel kept calling, kept checking in, but I started avoiding her. I was ashamed. Ashamed of where I lived, of what I'd become, of how completely I'd fallen. She had her own life, her own career as a successful attorney, her own beautiful home. I couldn't bear to be her charity case. Then one morning, about 3 months after the divorce was finalized, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Richard, Marcus's father. My whole body went rigid. This man had helped destroy me. What could he possibly want now? Richard said, "Jennifer, I need to meet with you. It's important. It's about Marcus." I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell him to go to hell. But there was something in his voice. Something that wasn't the cold, calculated tone I'd heard in court. He sounded old, tired. I said, "Why would I ever want to see you again? You helped him take everything from me." Richard said, "I know, and I need to make that right. Please, just 1 hour. I'll come to you." Against every instinct screaming at me to refuse, I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just that I had nothing left to lose. 2 days later, Richard knocked on my apartment door. He looked different than he had in court, smaller somehow. He wore a simple suit instead of his usual expensive tailored outfits, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked worn and old. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, the awkwardness thick between us. I didn't offer him anything to drink. I just waited. Richard took a long breath and opened the briefcase. Inside were stacks of documents, legal papers, financial records, things I didn't understand at first. Richard said, "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to believe me at first, but I need you to listen to everything before you react." I crossed my arms, my defenses up. Richard continued. He said, "The mansion. The one Marcus got in the divorce. It's not his. It never was his." I stared at him. Richard said, "I bought that house. I put it in Marcus's name years ago, but I'm the one who's been paying the mortgage, the property taxes, everything. It was an investment property, and I let Marcus and you live there. He told me it was his success that afforded it, and I let him believe that. I let everyone believe that." My mind was spinning. I said, "Why are you telling me this now?" Richard looked down at his hands. He said, "Because Marcus is not the man I thought he was, and because I've spent the last 3 months watching what happened to you, and I can't live with it anymore." He pulled out more papers, bank statements, account records. Richard said after the divorce, Marcus moved his girlfriend into the mansion. Not just any girlfriend. He married her last month, didn't even wait for the ink to dry on your divorce decree. Her name is Vanessa. She's 26 years old, and she's convinced Marcus that the house is truly his, worth millions, and they've been living like royalty. The bitterness in my throat was overwhelming. Of course Marcus had already moved on. Of course he had. But Richard wasn't finished. He said, "Here's the thing. I've been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I have maybe 6 months left, probably less. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about my life, about the choices I've made, about the man I raised my son to be." His voice cracked slightly. Richard said, "I helped him destroy you in court because he's my son, and I thought that's what fathers do. They protect their children. But watching him throw away 12 years with you like it meant nothing, watching him parade this new woman around, watching him lie to her the same way he lied to you, I realized I didn't raise a man. I raised a monster, and I'm complicit in that." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly I just felt numb. Richard pushed a document across the table. He said, "This is the deed to the mansion. As I said, it's in Marcus's name, but I'm the actual owner. I've been paying for everything, and I'm changing that. I'm transferring the deed to you." I actually laughed. It was a harsh, disbelieving sound. I said, "Why would you do that? What's the catch?" Richard said, "No catch. Well, one condition. You can't tell Marcus it came from me. As far as he knows, there was an error in the original deed filing. A legal technicality from when I first purchased the property. It turns out the house was never legally his. It was always in a trust, and that trust is now being dissolved, and the property is going to its rightful owner, which the courts will now recognize as you, the former spouse who was living there during the marriage." My head was spinning. I said, "That's insane. That's not how property law works." Richard smiled grimly. He said, "It is when you know the right people and have the right documentation. I've spent my entire career in law, Jennifer. I know how to make things happen, and I'm using every connection I have left to fix this." He pulled out more papers. Richard said, "Beyond the house, I'm also setting up a trust fund in your name. $2 million. It's money Marcus thinks is part of his inheritance, but it's not. It's mine to distribute as I see fit, and I'm giving it to you. With the house and this money, you'll be secure. You can rebuild your life. You can have the fresh start you deserve." I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I said, "Why now? Why not during the divorce?" Richard's face fell. He said, "Because I didn't see it then. I was blind. I saw my successful son, my heir, and I wanted to protect him. I didn't look at what he'd actually done to you. I didn't let myself see the pain. But then I got this diagnosis, and suddenly everything became very clear. Life is short, and I've wasted too much of mine enabling someone who doesn't deserve it. He paused. Richard said, "My wife, Marcus's mother, died 10 years ago. Cancer, like what I have now. In her final days, she made me promise to always take care of our family. I thought that meant protecting Marcus at all costs. But I realize now she would have been ashamed of what he became. She would have been ashamed of me for helping him." We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, I said, "What happens when Marcus finds out he's losing the house?" Richard said, "He'll be furious. He'll try to fight it. But the legal paperwork is airtight. I've made sure of that. And honestly, it's a lesson he needs to learn. He's been living a lie, thinking he's this self-made success story. It's time he faces reality." I looked at the documents spread across my cheap kitchen table. The deed, the trust papers, all of it seemed too surreal to be real. I said, "And you're really dying?" Richard nodded. He said 6 months if I'm lucky, maybe less. "The doctors have been very clear. I'm not doing treatment. I've lived my life. Now I just want to make peace with the parts of it I got wrong." Something in his voice, the resignation, the genuine regret, made me believe him. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't some elaborate scheme. This was a dying man trying to fix his mistakes. I said, "I don't know what to say." Richard said, "You don't have to say anything. Just sign these papers. Let me do this one right thing before I go." My hand shook as I picked up the pen. Part of me was terrified this was all a dream, that I'd wake up back in my apartment with nothing changed. But I signed. I signed every document he put in front of me. When we finished, Richard stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. He said, "Jennifer, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you in court. I'm sorry for enabling Marcus. I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved better." After he left, I sat at that table for hours, staring at the papers. I didn't call Rachel. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, trying to process what had happened. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Richard had indeed set everything up perfectly. Within 3 weeks, I received official notification that the property deed had been corrected due to a trust issue, and the mansion was now legally mine. Marcus called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. Finally, he sent a text that simply said, "You need to call me right now." I blocked his number. His lawyer reached out to Patricia. Patricia called me, her voice gleeful in a way I'd never heard before. She said, "Jennifer, I don't know what happened or how you pulled this off, but Marcus is losing his mind. His lawyers are scrambling. They can't find any legal grounds to contest the deed transfer." I said, "When do I get the house?" Patricia said, "They have 30 days to vacate." And here's the beautiful part. Since they've been living there rent-free and the property is legally yours, you can file for back rent for the 3 months they've been there. I did exactly that. Marcus had to pay me $75,000 in back rent, plus moving costs. The irony was almost too perfect. Rachel was the first person I told. I drove to her office and walked in unannounced. When I told her everything, she literally screamed with joy, then made me repeat the entire story 3 times. Rachel said, "This is insane. This is like movie-level justice. I can't believe Richard actually did that." I said, "He's dying. I think that changes people." Rachel got serious. She said, "How do you feel about it? Really feel?" I thought about that. I said, "I don't know yet. Part of me is elated. Part of me is terrified. And part of me feels guilty, which is stupid, but I do." Rachel shook her head. She said, "Don't you dare feel guilty. Marcus took everything from you. He cheated on you repeatedly. He paraded his new wife around in your home. You deserve this. You deserve all of it and more." Moving back into the mansion was surreal. Marcus and Vanessa had redecorated, which actually made it easier. It didn't feel like the home I'd lost. It felt like a new space, a new opportunity. But the first night there, walking through those enormous rooms alone, I felt overwhelmed. This house had been a symbol of everything I thought I had and lost. Now it was mine again, but I was different. I wasn't the same woman who'd lived here before. I spent the first few weeks just settling in, figuring out what I wanted to do with the space. The trust fund money gave me breathing room. I didn't have to rush into finding work. I could take my time, figure out who I wanted to be now. Rachel came over one evening with wine and Chinese food. We sat in the massive living room, our voices echoing off the high ceilings. Rachel said, "So what's next? You've got the house, you've got money, you've got freedom. What does Jennifer want to do with her life?" I'd been thinking about that constantly. I said, "I want to go back to marketing. but not the way I did before. I want to focus on helping small businesses, especially women-owned businesses. I want to use what I learned, all those years managing Marcus's image and hosting events, and turn it into something meaningful. Rachel raised her glass. She said, "I love that. You'd be amazing at it." Over the next few months, I started building my consulting business. I used one of the mansion's extra bedrooms as an office. I reached out to local women's business groups, offered free workshops on branding and social media marketing. Word spread quickly. My first real client was a woman named Diana, who'd started a bakery after her own divorce. She had incredible talent, but no idea how to market herself. When she first came to my office, she was barely keeping the lights on. She made the most incredible pastries I'd ever tasted, but her social media presence was non-existent. Her branding was inconsistent, and she had no strategy for reaching customers beyond word of mouth. We met every week for 3 months. I helped her develop a cohesive brand identity that reflected her personality and her baking style. We created a social media strategy that showcased not just her products, but her story, the journey of rebuilding after her marriage ended. We designed packaging that made her bakery memorable. We identified her target market and created campaigns specifically for them. But more than the technical work, we talked. About divorce. About starting over. About the fear of failure when you're rebuilding from nothing. About the shame of needing help. About the anger that comes in waves even when you think you're over it. During one session, Diana broke down completely. She said, "Some days I wake up and I can't believe this is my life. I'm 43 years old, starting over like I'm 20. My ex-husband is living with his girlfriend in our old house, and I'm in a tiny apartment above my bakery, working 18-hour days just to survive." I understood that feeling so completely it hurt. I said, "I know exactly what you mean, but look at what you've built. You took your passion and turned it into something real. That takes courage most people don't have." By the end of our 3 months together, Diana's business had tripled. She'd hired 2 employees. She was getting orders from corporate clients for events. She'd been featured in a local food magazine. But more than that, she'd found confidence. She walked differently, talked differently. She'd reclaimed herself. Diana said to me during our last meeting, "You saved my business. But more than that, you understood what I was going through. You got it. You didn't just teach me marketing. You showed me it was possible to build something beautiful from the wreckage." That became my specialty. Women rebuilding after major life changes. Divorcees, widows, women who'd sacrificed careers for family and were now reclaiming their professional lives. I understood them because I was them. My second client was a woman named Patricia, 51 years old, whose husband had died suddenly of a heart attack. She'd been a stay-at-home mom for 25 years, and suddenly she was alone with 2 kids in college and no income. She'd started a virtual assistant business but had no idea how to find clients or what to charge. Patricia came to our first meeting with a notebook filled with ideas and fears. She said, "I feel like I'm too old to start over. Everyone else in this field is in their 20s. Who's going to hire a 51-year-old woman who hasn't worked in decades?" I looked at her seriously. I said, "You're not competing with 20-year-olds. You're offering something they can't. Life experience, maturity, reliability, the ability to anticipate needs because you've been managing a household and family for 25 years. That's not a liability. That's your unique selling point." We worked together for 4 months. I helped her identify her ideal clients, professionals in their 40s and 50s who valued experience over trendy youth. We built a website that positioned her as a seasoned professional rather than a beginner. We crafted her marketing message around wisdom and reliability. Within 6 months, Patricia had more clients than she could handle. She'd raised her rates twice. She was making more money than she ever had, even accounting for inflation. But the real transformation was in how she saw herself. She told me in one of our final sessions, "I spent 25 years thinking I'd wasted my life being a mom and a wife. Now I realize I was building skills the whole time. I just didn't know how to translate them into business terms. You helped me see my own value." My third major client was a woman named Keisha, 32 years old, who'd left an abusive marriage with nothing but her car and her laptop. She was a graphic designer trying to build a freelance business while living in a women's shelter. Her talent was undeniable, but she was paralyzed by fear and self-doubt. Keisha said during our first meeting, which we held at a coffee shop because she was embarrassed about where she was living, "My ex always told me I wasn't good enough, that my designs were amateur, that no one would ever pay me for my work. And even though I know he was abusive, even though I know he was trying to control me, I can't get his voice out of my head. I saw so much of myself in her. That voice that tells you you're not enough, that you don't deserve success, that you should just give up. I'd fought that voice every single day for months after my divorce. I said to her, "That voice is lying. I've seen your portfolio. You're incredibly talented. But more than that, you survived. You left. That took more courage than most people have in their entire lives. If you can do that, you can build this business." We met twice a week for the first month because she needed the support. I taught her pricing strategies, how to find clients, how to present her work professionally. But I also taught her how to silence that critical voice, how to recognize her own worth, how to set boundaries with clients. The work was slow at first. Keisha struggled with charging what she was worth. She'd lowball her rates, terrified of losing clients. We had long conversations about value and self-respect. I said to her, "Every time you undercharge, you're telling yourself that your time and talent aren't valuable. You're reinforcing what your ex told you. You have to charge what you're worth, not just for the money, but for your own self-respect." It took time, but she got there. 6 months after we started working together, Keisha had moved out of the shelter and into her own apartment. She had a roster of regular clients. She'd built a portfolio website that showcased her talent. She'd started saying no to clients who didn't respect her boundaries or her rates. The transformation in her was remarkable. The scared, broken woman I'd met in that coffee shop had become confident and self-assured. She still had hard days, still struggled sometimes with the trauma of her past, but she was building something real. These women, and the dozens of others who came after them, taught me as much as I taught them. They showed me that resilience comes in many forms, that there's no timeline for healing, that success isn't just about money or business metrics, but about reclaiming yourself. Each client's story was different, but the themes were universal: loss, fear, doubt, and then slowly, growth, confidence, pride. The journey from victim to survivor to thriver. I started a weekly support group that met at my house. Every Thursday evening, a dozen women would gather in my living room. Some were clients, some were friends of clients, some just found me through word of mouth. We'd talk about business challenges, but also about the emotional work of rebuilding. One evening, a woman named Letitia shared her story. She'd been married to a man who controlled every aspect of her life, including all the finances. When she finally left, she discovered he'd destroyed her credit, emptied their joint accounts, and left her with nothing. She was living in her sister's basement with her 2 kids, trying to start a catering business with borrowed equipment. Letitia said, "Some days I wonder if I made the right choice leaving. At least when I was married, we had a house. The kids had their own rooms. Now we're all crammed into one bedroom, and I'm working jobs just to buy ingredients for the few catering gigs I can get." Another woman in the group, Sandra, spoke up. Sandra had left her marriage 3 years earlier and now ran a successful event planning business. Sandra said, "I remember those days. I remember thinking I'd made the worst mistake of my life. But Letitia, you're not crammed in a basement. You're safe, your kids are safe, and you're building something that's yours, that no one can take from you. That's worth more than a house you had to share with someone who hurt you." The group nodded. These women understood each other in ways that people who haven't been through it never could. I watched these conversations, facilitated them, but also learned from them. Each woman's story added another layer to my understanding of what it means to rebuild, to start over, to reclaim your life. The work I was doing expanded beyond just marketing consulting. I became a mentor, a counselor, a cheerleader. I connected women with resources, lawyers, therapists, other business owners. I used the privilege of my own resources, the mansion, the trust fund money, to help others. I started a small grant program, funding it with a portion of my business profits. Every quarter, I'd give $5,000 to a woman starting a business after a major life change. The applications were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. One recipient, a woman named Yolanda who'd escaped sex trafficking and was starting a nonprofit to help other survivors, wrote me a letter that I kept on my desk. She said, "This money means I can pay rent for 3 months while I focus on building the organization. But more than that, it means someone believes in me. Someone sees my worth beyond what was done to me. That's priceless." Reading her letter, I thought about Richard and his briefcase. How one person's decision to help can change the entire trajectory of someone's life. I was paying forward what he'd given me, and it felt like the most important work I'd ever done. The business grew faster than I'd imagined. Within 6 months, I had 15 regular clients. Within a year, I had to hire an assistant named Maya, a recent college graduate with a marketing degree and infectious enthusiasm for the work. Maya came through a recommendation from one of my clients. She was 23, fresh out of university and hungry to learn. During her interview, she asked me something that made me know she was the right fit. Maya said, "Why do you only work with women? Wouldn't you make more money if you expanded your client base?" I looked at her seriously. I said, "Because women, especially women rebuilding after major life changes, face unique challenges. They're often underestimated, underfunded, and overlooked. I understand those challenges because I've lived them. This is my niche, and it matters." Maya nodded thoughtfully. She said, "My mom went through a brutal divorce when I was in high school. She lost almost everything. I'd love to be part of giving other women what she didn't have." Maya became more than an assistant. She became vital to the business, handling scheduling and social media, but also bringing fresh ideas. One day, about 3 months after hiring her, she came into my office with a proposal. She said, "What if we started a podcast? You have all these incredible stories from clients. A podcast could reach women who can't afford consulting services." I was hesitant at first, but Maya was persistent. She said, "I'll handle all the technical stuff. You just have to show up and talk. Do what you already do best." We launched Rising Again 3 months later. Each episode, I'd interview a woman who'd rebuilt her life after a major setback: divorce, widowhood, illness, financial crisis, abuse. The stories were raw and honest and powerful. Our first guest was Diana, my bakery client. She told her story of going from a failing marriage and struggling business to running a thriving bakery with 5 employees. Diana said during the interview, "The hardest part wasn't the business stuff. Jennifer taught me that. The hardest part was believing I deserved success, believing that I wasn't a failure just because my marriage failed." That episode got 500 downloads in the first week. By the end of the first month, it had been downloaded over 3,000 times. Women were sharing it, commenting on it, reaching out to tell their own stories. We recorded episodes every week. Each guest brought something different. A woman who'd rebuilt after bankruptcy. A woman who'd left a cult and started a nonprofit. A woman who'd gone back to school at 50 and was now a successful lawyer. A woman who'd survived domestic violence and now ran a shelter. The podcast grew steadily. Within 6 months, we were getting 10,000 downloads per episode. Within a year, we had over 50,000 regular listeners. The podcast also brought speaking opportunities. I was invited to conferences, corporate events, women's organizations. At first, I was terrified of public speaking. My first speaking engagement was at a women's business conference in Chicago. 200 women in the audience. I stood backstage, my hands shaking. Rachel had flown in to support me. She found me in the green room, pacing. Rachel said, "You've got this. You've told your story 100 times on the podcast. This is no different." I shook my head. I said, "It's completely different. On the podcast, I can't see their faces." Rachel grabbed my shoulders. She said, "They're not going to judge you. They're going to see themselves in you." She was right. When I walked on stage and started talking, I could see women in the audience nodding, wiping tears, leaning forward in their seats. I talked about the marriage, the betrayal, the divorce that took everything. I talked about Richard and his briefcase. But mostly, I talked about the work of rebuilding. The therapy, the false starts, the moments of doubt, the slow accumulation of small victories. At the end of my talk, the applause was thunderous. But what really got me was the line of women who waited afterward to talk to me. Each one had a story. One woman, probably in her 60s, waited until everyone else had gone. She approached me with tears streaming down her face. She said, "I've been divorced for 15 years, and I've spent that entire time thinking I was the failure. Hearing your story, it's like you gave me permission to stop punishing myself." I hugged her. I said, "You did deserve better. And it's not too late to stop punishing yourself. It's never too late." The speaking engagements multiplied. I was invited to universities, to corporate women's leadership programs, to divorce recovery workshops, to entrepreneurship conferences. At a conference in Boston, I shared the stage with 3 other women entrepreneurs. One of them, a woman named Christina who'd built a multi-million-dollar tech company after her divorce, said something that stuck with me. Christina said, "Society tells us that our value is tied to our relationships, but the truth is, sometimes divorce is the best thing that can happen to you. It forces you to figure out who you are without someone else defining you." After the panel, Christina and I talked for over an hour. Christina said, "We should collaborate, do something together to help more women." That conversation led to the Women Rising Conference, an annual event we co-founded. The first conference was small, just 200 attendees in a hotel conference room. But the energy was electric. We had speakers, workshops, networking sessions. Topics ranged from practical business skills to emotional healing to legal rights. One attendee, a woman named Sophia who'd lost her husband and her home in the same year, told me at the end that it had changed her life. Sophia said, "I came here thinking I was alone. But hearing all these stories, meeting all these women, I realize we're all fighting similar battles. I don't feel alone anymore." By the third year, we had over 800 attendees from across the country. Maya helped manage it all. She'd grown into a full partner in the business. One day, about 2 years after hiring her, I called her into my office. I said, "I want to make you a partner. Not just an employee, but an actual partner. You've earned it." Maya's eyes filled with tears. She said, "Are you serious?" I nodded. I said, "Completely serious. This is as much yours as it is mine now." The business continued to evolve. We brought on 2 more consultants. We expanded the podcast to include episodes on specific topics like financial recovery, co-parenting after divorce, dating again, career transitions. We created online courses that women could take at their own pace. The online courses were Maya's idea. Maya said, "We're limited by time, but if we package your knowledge into courses, we can help thousands of women instead of dozens." We spent 3 months developing the first course, a comprehensive program on building a business after major life changes. We priced it affordably, making sure it was accessible to women with limited resources. The course launched and sold 300 spots in the first week. One course participant, a woman from a small town in Idaho named Beth, sent me an email that I printed out and kept on my desk. Beth wrote, "I'm a 52-year-old woman in a town of 800 people. My husband left me for someone younger, and I thought my life was over. Your course gave me the tools and the confidence to start my own online bookkeeping business. I now have 12 clients. You saved my life without ever meeting me." The success brought challenges. Managing a growing business while maintaining quality required constant attention. During one particularly stressful week, I called Rachel in a panic. I said, "I don't know if I can handle all of this. Maybe we grew too fast." Rachel said, "Do you remember where you were 3 years ago? You were in a tiny apartment thinking your life was over. Now you have a thriving business helping hundreds of women. You've handled worse. You can handle this too." She was right. We hired a business manager to handle operations. We brought in a tech person to manage the website and online systems. We built a team that could support the mission. Through it all, the core work remained the same: helping women rebuild. The work was fulfilling in a way my old job never had been. I wasn't just selling products or building brands for corporations. I was helping women find their voices. But success didn't erase the emotional journey I was still navigating. Some days I'd wake up in that mansion and feel like an imposter. Other days I'd feel proud. The grief over my failed marriage came in waves, unexpected and overwhelming. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Martinez who specialized in divorce recovery. Our first session was awkward. I sat in her comfortable office, surrounded by calming colors and soft lighting, and didn't know where to start. Dr. Martinez said, "Why don't you tell me what brought you here?" I laughed, a bitter sound. I said, "How much time do you have?" Over the following months, therapy became my anchor. Every Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon, I'd sit in that office and unpack everything I'd been carrying: the betrayal, the shame, the anger, the grief. One session early on, Dr. Martinez asked me something that stopped me cold. She said, "Jennifer, who were you before Marcus?" Before the marriage? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea. I'd met Marcus when I was 25, married him at 26. I'd spent my entire adult life as his wife. Who had I been before that? What had I wanted? What had I dreamed about? I started crying. I said, "I don't know. I don't even remember." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. She said, "Then maybe that's the work we need to do. Not just healing from the divorce, but discovering who you actually are." That became the focus of my therapy. Not just processing the trauma of betrayal, but excavating the person I'd buried under years of being someone's wife. Dr. Martinez gave me homework. Write down memories from before my marriage, things I'd loved doing, dreams I'd had, interests I'd abandoned. It was harder than any business plan I'd ever written. I remembered that I'd loved painting in college, watercolors specifically. I hadn't picked up a brush in over a decade. I remembered that I'd wanted to travel to Japan to see the cherry blossoms. I'd never gone because Marcus preferred European vacations. I remembered that I'd been interested in documentary photography, that I'd taken a course and loved it, but Marcus had said it was a waste of time compared to my marketing career. Small things, maybe, but together they formed a picture of a person I'd lost track of completely. Dr. Martinez said, "It's common for people in controlling relationships to lose themselves. You made yourself smaller to fit into the life Marcus wanted. Now you get to expand again. You get to take up all the space you need." I bought watercolor supplies. I set up a small studio in one of the mansion's spare bedrooms. At first, my paintings were terrible, rusty from years of neglect. But I kept at it. Every Sunday morning, I'd spend 2 hours painting. No goals, no pressure, just the meditation of brush on paper. Rachel came over one Sunday and found me covered in paint, a dozen half-finished watercolors spread across the room. Rachel said, "I haven't seen you this relaxed in years. Look at you." I looked down at my paint-stained hands and laughed. I said I forgot how much I loved this, how much I loved creating something just for the joy of it, not because it had to be perfect or profitable or impressive. The therapy work wasn't always gentle. Some sessions were brutal. Dr. Martinez pushed me to examine my role in the marriage's dysfunction, not to blame myself for Marcus's choices, but to understand my own patterns. She said, "You can't control what Marcus did, but you can understand why you stayed as long as you did, why you ignored red flags, why you made yourself smaller, not to judge yourself, but to make sure you don't repeat those patterns." That was hard to hear. I wanted to be purely the victim, blameless in the marriage's failure. But the truth was more complicated. I had seen signs that something was wrong. I'd felt the distance growing between us. I'd noticed the late nights, the secretiveness with his phone, the way he'd pull away when I tried to get closer. But I'd told myself stories to explain it away. He's stressed with work. He's tired. He needs space. All of this will get better when the business stabilizes. I'd made excuses because facing the truth was too scary. During one particularly difficult session, about 8 months after moving back into the house, I broke down completely. I said to Dr. Martinez, "I have everything I could want. The house, the business, financial security. But I feel so angry. Not at Marcus anymore, but at myself. How did I let myself become so dependent? How did I lose myself so completely?" Dr. Martinez leaned forward. She said, "Jennifer, you didn't lose yourself. You were in a partnership where you made sacrifices that you believed were temporary and mutual. That's not weakness. That's not losing yourself. That's trust. Marcus violated that trust. But you're not responsible for his choices." She paused, making sure I was really hearing her. Dr. Martinez continued. She said, "The anger you're feeling at yourself is misplaced. You trusted someone you loved. You built a life around that trust. When he betrayed that trust, the foundation crumbled. But you didn't cause the betrayal by trusting. He caused it by lying." Those words unlocked something in me. I'd been carrying guilt about the divorce, about my role in it, about whether I'd somehow deserved what happened. But I didn't. I deserved respect, honesty, partnership, and I hadn't gotten any of that. We spent several sessions working through that guilt. Dr. Martinez had me write letters to myself, to the woman I'd been during the marriage. Letters of forgiveness and understanding and compassion. In one letter, I wrote to my 35-year-old self, the woman who'd found the first texts and chosen to believe Marcus's explanations. I wrote, "You weren't stupid for trusting him. You weren't naive for wanting to save your marriage. You were loyal and hopeful, and those are beautiful qualities. He took advantage of them, but that doesn't make them weaknesses." Reading those letters out loud in therapy was excruciating, but it was also healing. Each word was a step toward forgiving myself, toward understanding that I'd done the best I could with the information and emotional tools I had at the time. Dr. Martinez also helped me work through my relationship with money and success. Growing up, I'd been middle class, comfortable, but not wealthy. Meeting Marcus and entering his world of luxury had been intoxicating at first, but it had also created a dependence I hadn't recognized until it was too late. She said, "You equated leaving the marriage with losing financial security. That made it harder to see clearly. You thought if you left, you'd have nothing. And you were almost right. Without Richard's intervention, you would have had very little, but you also would have survived." I thought about that a lot. Would I have survived? Yes. It would have been hard, living in that tiny apartment, struggling to rebuild my career from nothing. But women do it every day. I would have figured it out eventually. The realization was both empowering and humbling. I didn't need the mansion to be okay. I didn't need the trust fund. Those things made rebuilding easier, infinitely easier, but they weren't what made me strong. The strength had been there all along, buried under years of doubt and dependence. Dr. Martinez said, "The mansion is wonderful, but it's just a house. The real foundation you've built is internal. That's what no one can take from you. We also worked on my trust issues, my fear of ever being vulnerable with someone again. I'd started dating, casually, but I kept everyone at arm's length. The moment someone tried to get close, I'd pull away. Dr. Martinez said, "Marcus hurt you, but if you let that hurt close you off to future connection, he's still controlling your life. You don't have to rush into anything. But you do have to stay open to the possibility that not everyone is Marcus. That real, healthy love exists." That was terrifying to contemplate, letting someone in again, risking that kind of pain. But she was right. Living behind walls wasn't really living at all. One breakthrough came about a year into therapy. Dr. Martinez asked me what I'd learned about myself through this whole experience. I thought for a long moment. I said, "I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I learned that I can survive things that feel unsurvivable. I learned that losing everything material doesn't mean losing everything that matters. I learned that I'd rather have genuine connections and real work than a perfect-looking life built on lies." Dr. Martinez smiled. She said, "Those are powerful lessons. Most people go their whole lives without learning them. You got there through pain, which isn't fair, but you got there." The therapy also helped me understand my anger at Richard in a new way. At first, I'd been grateful for what he'd done, but underneath that gratitude was anger at the system that had allowed him to destroy me in court in the first place. Anger that justice had only come because one man decided to bestow it, not because the system itself was fair. Dr. Martinez said, "You can be grateful for what Richard did and still be angry about why it was necessary. Both things can be true. The legal system failed you. Richard's connections and power were the only reason you got any justice. That's not okay, even though you benefited from it." Acknowledging that anger, that awareness of systemic injustice, became part of my work. I started speaking at legal conferences about divorce reform, about protecting people who sacrifice careers for family, about the ways the system favors wealth and connections. I turned my experience into advocacy. The therapy work went deeper still. We explored my childhood, my parents' marriage, the models I'd had for what relationships should look like. My parents had stayed together for 40 years, but my father had been emotionally distant, and my mother had been quietly unhappy. I'd learned that women sacrifice and men take, and I'd recreated that dynamic with Marcus without even realizing it. Dr. Martinez said, "You can't change your parents' marriage or the lessons you learned from it, but you can choose different lessons now. You can model a different way of being for yourself and for other women watching your journey." After 18 months of therapy, I felt fundamentally different. Not healed completely because healing isn't linear, but changed in ways that mattered. I'd excavated the parts of myself I'd buried. I'd forgiven myself for choices made out of love and trust. I'd built internal strength that didn't depend on external circumstances. Dr. Martinez said during one of our later sessions, "You came in here broken, thinking you'd never be whole again. Look at you now. You're not just whole. You're more authentically yourself than you've ever been." The therapy taught me that the opposite of a painful past isn't a perfect future. It's an honest present. It's showing up as yourself, flaws and all, and building a life that reflects your actual values, not someone else's expectations. Around this time, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus's startup had failed. He'd lost millions. Vanessa had left him within weeks of the financial collapse. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the years wasted. I never heard from Richard again after that day in my apartment. I tried to call him once, to thank him, but his number was disconnected. Then, about 10 months after our meeting, I received a letter from an estate attorney. Richard had passed away. In his will, he'd left me another surprise. A handwritten letter. The letter was short. It said, "Jennifer, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope the house and the money have given you the fresh start I intended. I spent my last months watching from a distance as you rebuilt your life, and it gave me peace. You took what I gave you and turned it into something meaningful. That's more than Marcus ever did with anything I gave him. You proved that you deserved everything you lost and more. Thank you for giving an old fool a chance at redemption. Live well. Richard." I cried when I read it. For Richard, for the father Marcus could have had, for the complicated web of pain and healing and justice that had brought me here. Rachel found me on the back patio of the mansion, overlooking the city, the letter still in my hand. She said, "You okay?" I nodded. I said, "I think I am. For the first time in years, I really think I am." The second year after the divorce brought more growth. My business expanded. I published a series of articles about marketing for small businesses that went viral. I was invited to speak at conferences. I even started a podcast called Rising Again, where I interviewed women who'd rebuilt their lives after major setbacks. One of my guests was a woman named Carolyn, who'd lost her husband and her home in the same year. She'd been living in her car when she started her online consulting business. Now, 5 years later, she employed 12 people and was thriving. After we finished recording, Carolyn said to me, "You know, your story about the divorce and getting the house back, it's incredible. But what really resonates is how you talk about the work of healing. That's the part people need to hear." She was right. The house, the money, the external success was interesting, but what mattered was the internal work, the therapy, the hard conversations with myself about who I'd been and who I wanted to become, the forgiveness I had to extend to myself for choices I'd made out of love and trust. I started dating again, cautiously. A few dinners here and there, nothing serious. I wasn't ready for serious. But it felt good to remember that I was still a woman with desires and interests beyond just surviving. My first date post-divorce was a disaster. His name was Andrew, a financial consultant Rachel had set me up with. We met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place Marcus and I used to frequent. That should have been my first clue. It was a bad idea. Andrew spent the entire dinner talking about his investment portfolio, his luxury car collection, his vacation home in the Bahamas. Every sentence was a humble brag. Halfway through the meal, he asked what I did for work. I told him about my consulting business, about helping women rebuild after major life changes. Andrew nodded dismissively. He said, "That's nice, like a little hobby business. I'm sure it's rewarding, helping people and all that." I put down my fork. I said, "It's not a hobby. It's a successful business with multiple employees and 6-figure annual revenue." He looked surprised, then uncomfortable. He said, "Oh, I just assumed, since you're doing it from home and it's mostly working with women." The date ended shortly after. I drove home furious, not at him specifically, but at the assumptions. The idea that work helping people, especially women, was somehow less valuable than managing money for wealthy clients. Rachel called the next day to ask how it went. I said, "Never set me up again. I'll find my own dates." She laughed. She said, "That bad?" I told her about Andrew's comments and she groaned. Rachel said, "I'm so sorry. He seemed nice when I met him at that conference. I didn't realize he was a condescending jerk. The experience made me gun-shy about dating. But a few months later, I met someone at a business networking event. His name was Thomas, a divorced architect who was rebuilding his practice after his ex-wife and his business partner had had an affair and destroyed his professional reputation. Thomas and I connected immediately over shared experiences of betrayal and recovery. Our first coffee date turned into 3 hours of conversation. He understood the work of rebuilding in a way most people didn't. On our third date, Thomas asked me something that caught me off guard. We were walking through a park, the late afternoon sun filtering through the trees, when he said, "Jennifer, why do you seem so guarded? Even when we're having a good time, I can see you holding back." I stopped walking. The question was direct, almost too direct, but I appreciated the honesty. I said, "Because I gave everything to someone once, and he threw it away like it meant nothing. I'm not doing that again." Thomas nodded slowly. He said, "I get that. My ex-wife cheated on me with my business partner. The man I'd trusted with my company, my designs, everything. They're married now, running a version of my firm with my clients. Trust is hard to rebuild." We stood there in the park, two damaged people trying to figure out how to move forward. Thomas said, "I'm not asking you to trust me completely. I'm not asking you to give me everything. I'm just asking if we can try, slowly, to see if this could be something." We dated for 6 months. It was good in many ways. Thomas was kind, respectful, understanding. He had his own life, his own career, his own journey of healing. We didn't rush anything. We took it slow. But ultimately, we were both too focused on our careers and our healing to make it work. We were both still building ourselves back up, and neither of us had enough to give to a relationship. The timing was wrong. We had dinner at my house to talk about it. I'd cooked pasta, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Richard had once sat with his briefcase. Thomas said, "I care about you. I think you're incredible, but I think we both know this isn't quite right." I felt relief more than sadness. I said, "I care about you too, and I'm grateful for these months. You helped me remember that not all men are Marcus, that there are good people out there. But you're right. The timing isn't right for either of us. We parted as friends. He still sends me architecture clients sometimes, and I refer business contacts his way. It was the first relationship I'd had that ended amicably, with mutual respect and honest communication. That felt like growth. After Thomas, I took a break from dating for almost a year. I focused on my business, my therapy, my friendships. I went on that trip to Japan I'd always wanted to take. 2 weeks in Tokyo and Kyoto, seeing the cherry blossoms, eating incredible food, getting lost in temples and gardens. Traveling alone was terrifying at first. I'd never done it before. Marcus had always planned our vacations, always been there to make decisions and handle logistics. But being alone in a foreign country, navigating everything myself, was incredibly empowering. One afternoon in Kyoto, I was sitting in a traditional tea house, watching the garden outside, when I realized I was happy. Not happy despite being alone, but happy because I was alone. Happy because I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do, beholden to no one's preferences but my own. I took a photo of the garden and sent it to Rachel with the caption, "I'm finding myself." She replied immediately, "You already found yourself. Now you're just enjoying who you are." When I got back from Japan, something had shifted. I felt more confident, more settled in my own skin. I started dating again, but with different energy. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me or save me. I was looking for someone to complement the life I'd already built. I went on dates with various men. Some were fine but forgettable. Some were terrible. One guy spent the entire date on his phone. Another showed up drunk. One was still clearly in love with his ex-wife and spent 2 hours talking about her. But I also met some genuinely good people. Men who were kind and interesting and respectful. Nothing turned into a serious relationship, but each date taught me something about what I wanted and didn't want. One man, Gabriel, a high school teacher I met through a friend, asked me on our second date what I was looking for. I thought about it carefully. I said, I want a partner, not a project. I want someone who has their own life, their own interests, their own sense of self. I want someone who sees me as an equal, not someone to take care of or someone to take care of them. I want honesty, even when it's hard. I want someone who can communicate, who doesn't shut down when things get difficult. Gabriel smiled. He said, "That's a tall order." I shrugged. I said, "I'd rather be alone than settle for less than that." We dated for a few months. Gabriel was a good man, genuinely kind, passionate about his work with students. But we wanted different things long term. He wanted to travel the world, possibly teach abroad. I was rooted in my business, my community, my work with women who needed stability and consistency. We ended things honestly and kindly. He said, "You're going to find what you're looking for. You're too clear about what you want not to." These experiences dating different people helped me understand myself better. I learned that I valued independence highly, probably as a reaction to how dependent I'd been on Marcus. I learned that I needed someone who respected my work, not just tolerated it. I learned that I needed emotional intelligence and communication skills more than I needed grand romantic gestures. Dr. Martinez and I talked about my dating experiences in therapy. She said, "You're not settling anymore. That's significant growth. You'd rather be alone than compromise on your core values. That's healthy." I said, "But sometimes I wonder if I'm too picky, if I'm letting fear keep me from taking chances." Dr. Martinez shook her head. She said, "There's a difference between being cautiously selective and being closed off. You're being selective. You're dating. You're giving people chances. You're just not forcing something that doesn't feel right. That's wisdom, not fear." I also learned that I didn't need to be in a relationship to feel complete. For so long, I'd defined myself through Marcus. I was Marcus's wife before I was Jennifer. Now I was just Jennifer. Business owner, friend, mentor, woman rebuilding her life. And that was enough. Rachel and I talked about this over wine one evening at her place. She said, "You know what I love? You're not desperate to find someone. You're not settling. You're living your life. And if the right person comes along, great. If not, you're still okay." I raised my glass. I said, "Took me long enough to get here. But yeah, I'm okay. Actually, I'm more than okay. I'm happy." And I was. The dating experiences, both good and bad, had taught me that I could open myself to possibility without losing myself. I could be vulnerable without being dependent. I could want partnership without needing it to survive. That felt like the ultimate victory over what Marcus had done. He'd tried to make me believe I was nothing without him. And I'd proven, to myself more than anyone, that I was everything without him. Rachel, meanwhile, had become my biggest cheerleader and closest confidant. She'd been there through everything, and our friendship had deepened into something I treasured. One evening, 2 years after the divorce, we were sitting in my newly renovated kitchen. I'd finally made the house truly mine, decorating it in a style that reflected who I was now, not who Marcus had wanted me to be. Rachel said, "Do you ever think about him? About Marcus?" I considered the question. I said sometimes, but not the way I used to. I used to think about what I'd lost. Now when I think about him, I mostly just feel grateful that I got out. Grateful that Richard gave me a chance to start over. Grateful that I found myself again. Rachel smiled. She said, "You know what I'm most proud of? You didn't let bitterness destroy you. You could have. You had every right to be angry forever, but you chose to build something instead." That observation stuck with me. It was true. Somewhere along the way, I'd made a choice. I could stay trapped in anger and resentment, or I could use what happened to me as fuel for something better. I chose better. My business continued to grow. By the third year post-divorce, I had a team of 5 working with me. We'd helped over 200 women launch or revitalize their businesses. I'd written a book proposal about marketing and personal branding that 3 publishers were interested in. Life was good. Really good. Not perfect, because nothing is, but good in a real, sustainable way. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, I was in my home office when my assistant Maya called up to me. Maya said, "Jennifer, there's someone here to see you. He says it's personal." I wasn't expecting anyone. I came downstairs to find a man in his early 40s standing in my foyer, looking uncomfortable. It took me a moment to place him, but then I recognized him from old photos. It was David, Marcus's younger brother. We'd never been close. He'd been at the wedding, but had kept his distance during the marriage and the divorce. I said, "David, this is unexpected." He shifted his weight. He said, "I know. I'm sorry to show up unannounced. I tried to call, but I didn't have your new number." I gestured to the living room. We sat down, the awkwardness thick between us. David said, "I wanted to come by because I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually. I knew what Marcus was doing. The cheating. The way he treated you. And I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was between you two. But that was cowardly. I didn't know what to say. I certainly hadn't expected this." David continued. He said, "After Dad died and everything came out about the house, about what he did to make things right, Marcus completely spiraled. He blamed everyone but himself. He burned bridges with everyone in the family. It's been 2 years and he still hasn't taken any responsibility for his actions." He paused. David said, "I wanted you to know that not everyone in our family supported what happened, and I wanted to tell you that I think what you've built since then, your business, the way you've helped people, it's impressive. You deserved better than what my brother gave you." His words were simple, but they meant something. Acknowledgement from someone who'd been there, who'd seen it all, mattered. I said, "Thank you for coming here and saying that. It wasn't necessary, but I appreciate it." We talked for a while longer. David told me he'd gotten divorced himself recently, that he'd started to see relationships differently, to value honesty and partnership in ways he hadn't before. He asked about my business, seemed genuinely interested in what I was doing. Before he left, he said, "I know this is strange, but if you ever need anything, family advice, or just someone who understands the whole mess, please reach out." After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and family, and the complicated ways people can surprise you. That evening, I had dinner with Rachel at our favorite restaurant downtown. I told her about David's visit. Rachel said, "That took courage for him to come. Are you going to stay in touch?" I said, "Maybe. I'm not opposed to it." It was nice to have someone from that family acknowledge what happened. Rachel raised her glass. She said, "Here's to you, Jennifer. 3 years ago, you were in a tiny apartment thinking your life was over. Now look at you. Thriving business, beautiful home, real friendships. You did that? All of it." I clinked my glass against hers. I said, "We did that. I couldn't have done any of this without you." She shook her head. She said, "I was just the cheerleader. You were the one who had to do the actual work." Looking back now, from the vantage point of 3 years post-divorce, I can see the journey so clearly. The devastation of losing everything, the unexpected gift from Richard, the slow, painful work of rebuilding not just my external life, but my internal sense of self. I'm not the same woman who stood outside that mansion in tears, holding 3 sad boxes. That woman was broken, lost, hollowed out by betrayal and loss. I'm someone different now. Stronger, yes, but also softer in ways that matter. More compassionate, more aware of what truly matters. The house stopped being a symbol of what I'd lost and became a symbol of what I'd gained. Not just material wealth, but self-knowledge. The ability to stand on my own. The confidence to build something meaningful. My business continues to grow. Last month, I signed a book deal for a guide to personal branding and business building for women over 35. The advance was substantial, and more importantly, the opportunity to share my knowledge with more women felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned. I still have hard days. Days when I feel the old anger bubble up, when I wonder what my life would have been like if Marcus had been honest, if our marriage had been real. But those days are fewer now, and when they come, I have tools to handle them. Therapy, meditation, the support system I've built, the work that gives me purpose. Rachel and I were having coffee last week in my kitchen when she asked me a question that made me think. She said, if you could go back and change it, would you? If you could make Marcus faithful, make the marriage work, would you want that? I thought about it carefully. I said, honestly, no, because that woman who was married to Marcus, she was living a half-life. She was playing a role, being who someone else needed her to be. I'm finally being myself, and that's worth more than any mansion or any marriage that was built on lies. This morning, I was in my office working on a presentation for a conference next month when Maya brought in the mail. Mixed in with the bills and business correspondence was a handwritten envelope, no return address. Inside was a short note from Marcus. It said, Jennifer, I know I have no right to contact you. I know I hurt you in ways I can't undo. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I destroyed. I see what you've become, what you've built, and I realize I never deserved you. I was a coward who blamed you for my own inadequacies. I'm sorry. That's all. Just sorry. Marcus. I read the note 3 times. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sad for the time we'd wasted. But mostly, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was truly closed. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. His apology, while appreciated, didn't change anything. It didn't erase the pain or the years of lies. It was just words on paper. I put the note in a drawer and went back to work. I had a client call in 20 minutes with a woman who was launching her 3rd business after surviving breast cancer. That mattered. That was real. That was the life I'd chosen to build. Tonight, I'm sitting on the back patio of this mansion, watching the sunset over the city, thinking about the journey that brought me here. From the heights of a marriage I thought was perfect, to the depths of losing everything, to this moment of genuine peace and purpose. Richard's gift wasn't just the house or the money, though those were significant. His real gift was showing me that it's never too late to make things right, that redemption is possible even at the end of life, that we all have the power to change the course of someone's story. I think about the women I've helped over the past 3 years, the single mothers who launched successful businesses, the widows who found new purpose, the divorcees who rebuilt their lives from scratch. Each one of them taught me something about resilience, about the human capacity to survive and thrive even after devastating loss. My phone buzzes with a text from Rachel. She says, "Dinner this weekend? I have news." I smile and text back, "Absolutely. I'll cook." This house, which once represented everything I'd lost, is now filled with friendship, purpose, and genuine joy. The rooms that used to echo with false happiness now hold real laughter, honest conversations, meaningful work. I'm not naive enough to think that my journey is over, that there won't be more challenges, more heartbreaks, more moments of doubt. Life doesn't work that way. But I know now that I can handle whatever comes. I've proven it to myself. The woman I've become is someone I'm proud of. Not because I have a mansion or a successful business, though those are nice, but because I chose to take the worst thing that ever happened to me and use it as fuel to become better, not bitter. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I raise my glass of wine in a silent toast. To Richard, for his unexpected redemption. To Rachel, for never giving up on me. To the women I've helped and who've helped me. And to myself, for surviving, for thriving, for becoming. Tomorrow I have 3 client meetings, a podcast interview to record, and a chapter of my book to finish. Next month, I'm speaking at a women's leadership conference in front of 500 people. Next year, who knows what possibilities await. But tonight, right now, I'm just here, in this moment, in this house that's finally truly mine, with a life that's finally truly mine. And that, after everything, feels like the greatest victory of all. The briefcase Richard brought that day didn't just contain legal documents and bank statements. It contained possibility. the possibility of starting over, the possibility of becoming someone new, the possibility of building a life based on authentic values rather than false appearances. I've learned that houses are just structures. What makes them homes is the life we build inside them. This mansion was never really about square footage or property values or status symbols. It was about what it represented at different points in my journey. During my marriage, it represented success that wasn't real. After the divorce, it represented everything I'd lost. When Richard gave it back, it represented justice and redemption. And now it represents possibility, purpose, and the power of choosing to rebuild. I've also learned that material possessions, while nice, don't define us. The woman I was before the divorce had more physical possessions but less sense of self. The woman I am now has both, but if I had to choose, I'd take the self-knowledge every time. My clients often ask me how I did it, how I went from rock bottom to where I am now. They want a formula, a step-by-step guide, a guarantee that if they follow the same path, they'll get the same results. I tell them the truth. There is no formula. There's only the decision, made every single day, to keep going, to do the work, even when it's hard, to believe that you're worth the effort of rebuilding, to trust that on the other side of devastation lies the possibility of something better. Some days that decision is easy. Other days it takes everything you have just to get out of bed. But you make it anyway. You keep making it until the good days outnumber the bad, until the life you're building feels more real than the life you lost. The story of my divorce and what came after isn't really about a mansion or money or revenge. It's about the journey from who I thought I should be to who I actually am. It's about the courage it takes to rebuild when everything falls apart. It's about the surprising places healing can come from, even from people who hurt you. Marcus will live with his choices. Richard found peace before he died. Vanessa moved on to her next opportunity. And me? I'm here, in this beautiful house, living a beautiful life, doing meaningful work, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. If you'd told me 3 years ago when I was standing outside with those 3 boxes that this is where I'd end up, I wouldn't have believed you. The pain was too sharp, the loss too complete, the future too dark to imagine anything good coming from it. But life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for the best thing. Sometimes we have to lose everything to figure out what actually matters. Sometimes rock bottom becomes the solid foundation on which we build something truly extraordinary. I'm not grateful for what Marcus did. The betrayal, the lies, the pain he caused. None of that was okay. But I am grateful for where I ended up, for the person I became in the process of healing, for the work I get to do now, helping other women find their own paths through darkness into light. As I head inside for the night, I pause at the doorway and look back at the city lights twinkling below. 3 years ago, I thought this view was lost to me forever. Now it's mine in a way it never was before. Not because my name is on a deed, but because I earned it through the hardest work there is, the work of becoming yourself. The mansion is quiet as I move through it, turning off lights, locking doors, preparing for tomorrow. But it's a good quiet, a peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being comfortable in that knowledge. In my bedroom, I look at myself in the mirror. Same face, same body, but different eyes. These eyes have seen betrayal and loss and pain, but they've also seen redemption and growth and triumph. They've seen the worst and the best of what humans can do to each other and for each other. I think one final time about Richard and his briefcase, Marcus and his apology, the life I lost and the life I built. And I realized that the real gift wasn't the mansion at all. It was the opportunity to start over with wisdom I didn't have before, to build a life based on truth instead of illusion, to discover that I was strong enough to survive what felt unsurvivable. Tomorrow, the work continues. Clients to help, businesses to build, women to empower, a book to write, a life to live. But tonight, I sleep peacefully in this house that represents so much more than walls and windows. It represents possibility. It represents resilience. It represents me. And that, after everything, is more than enough.